Hello and good evening, everyone. I know it's a Wednesday, and you're like, what is Dandan doing streaming on a Wednesday night? Bizarre circumstances. Yes, I'm aware, but these circumstances are really they're just here because I am taking over someone else's show that couldn't make it, and tonight we have a very exciting guest that's going to talk with us. In about 10 minutes, they should show up, from what I am aware. Um, so it's this tonight's show is Mandisa Thomas, who is the president of Black Nonbelievers. You might have seen her on the Atheist Experience or the call-in show with Matt Dillahunty, which I really didn't know she was on until my friend told me so, not too many hours ago. It's Wednesday, my dude. Yeah, Casey knows what's happening. It's Wednesday. It's the wrong day, but it's okay. It's a good day nonetheless. It should be an exciting conversation, and I hope it's going to be good. Talk about atheism, talk about the challenges in that community. If someone wants to jump on and challenge us, maybe that will happen. Probably not. We just don't have the size for that quite yet, but it should be exciting. Um, Last night I had a fun stream with Perry as well. And I think I should do more of those. I've had a pretty hectic week with all the different interviews and maybe taken on a little too much, but that's fine. From what I see in my schedule, I'm going to remind everyone that I am talking to Reza Aslan in November, and I am having Buck Angel and Philly Ill do a debate on my stream. I think next week Wednesday, if I'm not incorrect about that. Let me just double check the schedule down here. Yes, September 20th, Buck Angel and Philly Ill are going to do a debate on my show. Um, Again, these are not usually my shows, but that's okay. I'm filling in for someone else who couldn't make it through difficulties of that situation. But it should be absolutely fun. What else do we have to talk about today? Um, Other than Mandisa, nothing really. So I'm just here to hang out and do a bunch of things. I did do a bunch of research on Mandisa, and we're both actually from New York, right? She grew up in Queens. She grew up. Let me get the Wikipedia page open just so I don't say things that are wrong, because you never just want to end up saying things that are wrong. Yeah, she grew up in Jamaica, Queens, which is not too far away from where I am. Maybe like a 20-minute drive or something like that, which should be interesting. We can talk about that, our shared history, and many other things once she jumps on. I also think it's really interesting to have this discussion juxtaposing my discussion with Cornel West about religion, right? He is a black religious man, but he criticizes the church, and it remains in his attitude of religiosity as like the way of fixing issues. So I'm interested to see her take and how she's going to approach this similar issue and similar problems. Let me see. Okay, that's all there. Everything's set up there. Such a stressful day today, actually. Shows at night after work become problematic at a certain point. Gotta slow down. But we saw another jump in the stats for YouTube. I think we're up for subscribership 2,000% from last month, which is incredible. It's amazing. It's wonderful. And I'm very excited that that is the case, actually. So we're keeping that flow going. Soon, hopefully, we'll get monetized, which is obviously the goal. And then I can't wait for the criticisms. How can you say that you're for socialist principles, even though I'm not completely for all of them, right? But how could you say you're for socialist principles and take money from YouTube? Are all socialists supposed to live in a bucket under the under the bridge or something? But yeah. Ooh, another thing, the whole impeachment thing with Joe Biden is just getting out of hand. Really, that's like going to be the main news forever. And I think that is coming like right off the tail end of like kind of starting to see a reduction like the trans rhetoric and like the all the evil shit Trump has done. So they're really just trying to completely focus on irrelevant stuff that has nothing to do with what is really going on. And we're going to keep seeing that. We're going to keep seeing a party, a Republican Party, which used to be the fundamentalist evangelical party, still fail at the same thing. And what are they failing at? They're failing at just understanding A, what is evidence, B, how do we evaluate evidence, and C, what it means to what is happening to my mic. There we go. Thank you very much. And C, what is it? What do we? How do we act when we don't have justifiable evidence? Right? Because I saw a TikTok today, I think, about a conversation between a CNN host and someone else, and basically the question asked is, well, do you have justification to open an impeachment inquiry into uh, Joe Biden? And they go, well, we have to open the inquiry to find the evidence. Right? It's like the backwards thinking that we're dealing with. It's the same backwards thinking that fundamentalists were dealing with. I don't know, like 10, 15 years ago, when we were dealing with that entire enigma. Okay. That sad moment where you realize only two people are watching the stream and you don't know what to talk about, and you need content, but you don't know what to talk about because you don't have the content to talk about it, because everything is rushed and everything is procrastinated. But that's okay. That's how life works. Let me try to. Who needs to come on the show tonight? Maybe we can get Thomas. Is Thomas gonna come on? No. Oh my God, Nivik. Nivik would be amazing. Yo, Nivik would be fun. It'd be like a Howard Stern show, honestly. Um, what else? Oh, abortion. Abortion is a big topic that I think I'm gonna need to address a little bit better. The last Rumble that we did this past Sunday, I think that whole conversation on abortion was absolutely hideous. It was, I think, I think I completely underperformed in that conversation. 1000%. I don't think that was the best version of myself. And I think that one of the biggest reasons for that failure was an inability to control the room and also guide the room in the appropriate way to talk about that. I have to get better of not necessarily just responding to a person's claims, right? So Jacinta just kept hopping claims that we would bring up a conjecture and she would hop from that conjecture to another point, whilst bringing in things like genocide and flaps, and just overall just not actually addressing with the basis of the argument, right? If we started talking about consciousness and she wanted to talk about abortion, but then claiming that we're not talking about abortion, we're talking about consciousness, like, it was just an absolute shit show. And I only realized how much of a shit show it was when I, went back to review the information, kind of editing a few videos and a few shorts, and you can tell it's a bad job when you're kind of just finding snippets of 1 minute, 2 minute golds, instead of like, oh, there's a 10-minute period of such good content, and I'm going to try to whittle it down to less, which is contrasted with my show with Cornell West, where everything was just an absolute treasure trove. Okay, so from what I know, Mandisa should come in any moment now. Maybe she won't. I didn't get a confirmation. I asked. Okay, let's double check that she is definitely on. Oh, this is the wrong person. Didn't mean to send that there. Delete that message. Delete. Okay, doke. Let's see. Okay, she's on her way. Excellent. We did get a confirmation. Fantastic, fantastic. So we're just waiting now. Do I sing a little song? Do I? How do I entertain everyone? Ah, all right. Yeah, it should be. I hope it's an exciting interview. I'll try to. I'll always try to vibe with people on their level, meet them where they're at, have a good conversation, have a good time. Usually, how that should work. Let's do a little more housekeeping, and try to just send that information everywhere else. Let's go ahead and put that into this politics chat. Get people to watch it, or religion chats are always good. People like to talk about atheism and religion and God, and why believe in God and why not believe in God. um, I know one question that I always like to talk to atheists, but what is the thing do you remember that like made you go get that aha moment, that like pressure wash moment, where you kind of realize that, oh shit, God's not real. Like what that moment is very unique for many different people, and the stories are also fantastic. So really can't wait for that. I find, in conversations with a lot of religious folks, I find myself very frustrated or not even willing to talk about the deist notion of God. I just really end up not caring about that one. It's just like, whatever, you believe in the deist God, like, okay, what do you want me to do about that? Tell you that they're, try to argue with you why you don't have the evidence to believe that something created the world, and then was like, okay, goodbye. Like, most people believe in a God that rose from the dead, that interacts into their day-to-day life, that answers prayers, that heals the sick, right? And I think that it just, this whole deist argument is in the same way to what Jacinta did the other night on the Rumble, where instead of actually arguing the position of like, oh, I believe that that life begins at the moment that an egg and a sperm meet. They argue, oh, there's late term abortions happening at 9 months, and that's why I'm anti-abortion. That's not why you're anti-abortion. It's the same reason why the people who believe that like Jesus Christ rose from the dead, or they believe that God gave rocks to Moses on the mountain, or they believe that Zeus sits on top of Mount Olympus, they don't believe that because they have a deistic notion of God. Not at all. Never ever in the history of ever has that even been the case. Um, and it's such a disingenuous argument that it needs to be called out. And the fact that I didn't hold Jacinta to the fire, to her feet to the fire. If that's not what you're arguing, let's talk about what you actually believe, not what you pretend to believe or what you pretend to care about, was a massive failure on my part. Um, and if you're watching the show, I would say that you are a little. You could have actually taken a position. Just because a guest is there to argue a position doesn't mean that you can't take a position as well and argue it on your own merit. Like, you should be doing that. You're not stealing their thunder. You're not stealing their voice. You are here on the show as a speaker, and you should just talk about what you believe. It's called the hangout because that's what we're doing. We're hanging out. It's not like some formal engagement. And that's a really important thing. Recently, I used to, I don't say I used to, I don't know why I said recently, it doesn't matter. When I think of, oh my God, my AC sounds so loud right now. God, I hope that's not coming through the mic too aggressively, but it's too hot without it. But I used to really think that atheistic societies in general, and I believe that they can replace things that religions had, and they can replace things that religions give. But at the same time, I think that there is some sort of truth in the idea that with the loss of religiosity, people are grabbing onto civil religions. As like Rousseau described them, civil and a really interesting civil religion that we're seeing, right? Religions, if we agree that they're dogmatic, that they centralize around a key figure who's Christ-like, or doesn't do anything wrong, or is like, has, even if they do things wrong, really they're anointed by God. We hear the same language being levied by Trump supporters, right? Trump supporters themselves behave in this type of like religious fervor. And I think a big part of that is twofold, right? Okay. In the atheist sphere, when I was growing up and I just entering, I just kind of was after my first year of college and I became an atheist. I remember the community was really much just centered around this argument of God. And a big split in the community began in two ways. The first split that I remember really recognizing was like atheism plus, where they started adding notions of like, LGBTQ ideas into it, or started talking about racism and structural racism. And that was like the first distinction. It was like this distinction between like those who recognize racism as a systemic problem versus those who didn't understand racism as a systemic problem. And kind of they started having a schism around those notions. The second split that I saw was with the rise of Jordan Peterson. The rise of Jordan Peterson captured the hearts and minds of many atheists who I think didn't have the structures or the morals or the philosophy to kind of carry them forward, where they're like they saw a type of admiration for their culture and admiration for what they used to believe, but reframed not from a literalist perspective, but from a metaphorical and and then analogical, right? That's what it is, analogical, for an analogy from that perspective. And it's that perspective that kind of like, like wrote people into this type of dogmatic notions around the things he says, where all of a sudden stories and myths have so much more to them than just being a story or a myth, right? Because people, in the same way that someone goes, oh, that's just a theory, a lot of them I feel felt that the Old Testament or the Bible was just dismissed as a myth and as a story. But it's not being dismissed as a myth or of a story, but rather it's taken down off its pedestal to the line of every other myth and other story around our generation and around our society and throughout history. And kind of putting it on the same pedestal gives you the perspective that it doesn't have a uniqueness to it. There's no chauvinistic nature to it. And this is why a lot of Jordan Peterson followers, or even atheists that follow him, tend to have a rhetoric that tends to align with a type of Western white chauvinism, where other culture and other cultures, they do not highlight this elevated notion, this elevated truth that the Bible does create. It's that, and a lot of times people call them white supremacists, or they'll call them racists, or they'll call them imperialists, and rightly so, rightly so, they get offended. I would be offended if I was called that. I was called that at the time. I think I didn't express myself. Oh, we have Mandisa here with us. That's all right. That's all right. I'm gonna bring you into frame, and we'll start having it happens. It's no big deal. I've been late to many things too many times. I hear you. I hear you. But we're gonna keep this casual. This is more like a discussion. It's not too formal. We're gonna have a good time chat for like 40, 50 minutes about
Okay.
whatever it might be, and just move on, right? So, and I think that's
Okay.
the best way to go about it. Well, how's your evening been? Let's start with that.
It's been a little hectic. I just got in
I
and yeah, I didn't realize that my computer was off, so I had to restart it.
mhm.
So yeah, that's yeah, it's been a busy day.
Same for me. Same for me. I worked in the day and I do this in the evening, so it's just like so much things to do. I am taking over from Masha, so my research into isn't as cohesive as I usually like to have it. But I think I have some things. I think we could vibe on. So you grew
Sure.
up in Jamaica, Queens, right?
Yes, yes. I'm a New
Okay.
York City native.
Okay. I grew up in Valley. I actually grew up in Israel, and I moved to New York, and I grew up in Valley Stream for most of my
How
life.
about that? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we're
you
like two
do.
seconds away from one another. Yeah.
Yeah. So you. I used to work at the Sunrise Theater
Oh
when it
my
was still
goodness.
there.
Oh yeah, I used to work at. I mean, I've definitely probably have seen you when I used to go there a lot. It used to
Hmm.
be called Murderplex, I believe. People used to call it Murderplex as two people got
Yeah,
stabbed
because
there.
someone did get shot there years ago, and
Yes, yeah.
I started working there after they installed the metal detectors.
Okay, okay. Small world. I love it. I love it. I love it. Um, so let's talk about your upbringing, right? Because New
Sure,
York isn't usually, at least from most people's perspective, a religious place, right?
it actually is. I mean, if you think about Queens, if you think about most of New York City, there is damn near a church on every corner,
Mm-hmm.
especially in places like Jamaica and the surrounding areas. So even though there's a lot of diversity there, it's still very heavily religious. New York definitely has heavy Jewish population,
Mm-hmm.
heavy very multicultural and very multi-religious. Even though it does not seem to get in the way of everyday life, there's still a heavy religious presence there. Um, yeah, more than it's just not one denomination, if you will, or one religion. Unlike places in the South where almost everything is based around Christianity.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Brooklyn and Queens themselves. I think when you look at like the most fundamentalist religious groups in New York, people don't know about it. Is the Orthodox Haredi communities that I'm very closely associated with. Like when my family moved from Israel, my parents didn't want us to lose our religiosity, so they got our ethnicity, our roots, our heritage. So we
Right.
very much got close within that community itself, and that's kind of where I found myself very much indoctrinated into the religion and broke out of that myself. For
Yes.
how was that experience for you? First of all, living in New York and interacting with the Jewish community, but also breaking out of whatever religiosity that you were a part of, or did you grow up religious at all?
So actually, to go into my background, I wasn't formally raised religious. I
Okay,
was born in 1976. I just celebrated my 47th birthday last
congratulations.
week. Thank you. And I was raised in the Black conscious community.
Okay,
So
what's that?
there's a place called the African Poetry Theater on Jamaica Avenue. If you have never heard of it or never passed by it, it's close to. Like it would be close to it's Jamaica, close to like Long Island,
Okay,
going towards like Elmont.
okay,
Um,
right, literally 5 minutes away from me right now. So,
yeah, yeah. So it was a place where I learned a lot about Black history and culture growing up.
hmm,
I was raised to be very Afrocentric, learning about institutional racism and injustice that were committed against not just Black folks but other marginalized groups.
hmm,
And so there was a lot of focus. There was a huge focus on what it meant to be proud to be Black, especially in a world where there's still a lot of anti-Blackness. So
yes,
learning about Black history beyond slavery, learning about all of the great accomplishments that many Black people have made. Um, and just learning about resistance and resistance movements in general. So I like to say I knew who Malcolm X was before Martin Luther King.
interesting.
Uh,
Okay,
and so, yeah, that was my framework of what shaped my upbringing and also my sense of my view of how I looked at the world. So it was a bit radical,
okay,
very, very rooted in history and education. And so I learned early on about how Christianity was pretty much forced on the enslaved Africans and
yeah.
their
It was
descendants.
a primary tool of colonialization in across the
Yes,
world.
across the world, absolutely, and how that impacted generations of Black folks in the United States and in the Caribbean, basically
Hmm.
across North America. And it always what always struck me was that my paternal grandmother, my father's mother, whom my mother would allow me to go to church with if I wanted to when I was younger. She had a big picture of white Jesus on her wall.
Okay, okay,
And so it did strike me how many Black folks always identified with white Jesus, considering the history, considering the colonialization, considering the conditioning. And that wasn't lost on me even as a kid.
interesting.
Um,
Okay,
yeah, so I mean, I considered myself fortunate to have had that upbringing and that awareness growing up because many of my peers didn't have it.
hmm,
And also, my mother's mother, my maternal grandmother, she was born and raised in New Orleans, lived in New York for a long time,
okay,
but religion wasn't a focal point even on that side of the family. Like I had Christian relatives, I have Muslim relatives, but my grandparents themselves never made us pray over any meals. We never
okay.
had to pray at Thanksgiving. We never had to pray for Easter. For Easter, for my grandmother, it was about the Easter bunny. It was about the candy. It was about the
It was
Easter
cultural.
egg.
It was cultural.
It was,
Are
and
do you have Caribbean descent in your family?
no, no.
No. Okay.
From no, most of my family's from like North Carolina, the
Okay. Okay.
continental United States. So I would
Okay.
be considered foundational Black American.
Foundation. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Because
So
I find in Caribbean families it's either split fit. It's either they're very religious or they're just kind of like, oh, we just celebrate the holidays because people celebrate the holidays. Like if you're from Trinidad, for example, I
yeah,
find it to be less religious than if you're like from Jamaica or something like that.
yeah. My grandmother was a very very festive individual, and
Hmm.
coming from a large family. I mean, I myself only have two brothers, but my mother had 10 brothers and sisters, 10 plus. So
Okay.
I grew up with a lot of cousins in my neighborhood, and
That's
my
epic.
dad's side had like six brothers, six siblings.
Hmm.
So both sides of the family were large.
I hear
And
you.
so there were a lot of gatherings, a lot of celebrations. And so, I mean, one of my favorite holidays is Thanksgiving because of my grandmother. We would always go over there and eat some really good food, and understanding that Thanksgiving, as it is celebrated, as it is acknowledged here in the United States, is problematic.
Obviously,
So
it's a
yeah,
holiday it's a holiday celebrating the thanks that we're giving for the fact this entire nation is built off the death of the civilizations that lived here before
right,
us. Yeah.
right. But also noting that harvest celebrations are common throughout the world. So the United States is not the only country that celebrates Thanksgiving. So,
Hmm.
just being able to process that and have that awareness as an adult that, it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the best parts about our position is that it's supposed to be informed. It's supposed to be better
Okay.
informed.
Better
So
info.
yeah.
So without this religious like background, what made you so like activated about atheism activism or atheism actually within the black community? Like, where did this fire come from?
So it really did come from my teachers growing up. Again, that background in Black history and culture, but also my engagement with a lot of Christians. Right? So
Ah, okay, okay.
it's not that it's not that every Christian I met was a bad person, but I saw a lot of the hypocrisy growing up, and it was hard not to see it growing up in my neighborhood. I'm actually from South Jamaica Houses 40 Projects that was right by York College.
Okay.
So, saw a lot of quote unquote good Christian girls and get pregnant, have sex, do all of the things
That you're
that
not
technically
supposed to
they're
be
supposed to do.
doing.
Right, right. And some of the Muslim girls and boys too. So, that was one part of it. And also, I noticed the even like the anti-blackness within Christianity among Black people, right?
Hmm.
There was for me growing up and learning about Black history and culture, I noticed that was almost glossed over when it came to some of my Christian peers.
Hmm.
The focus on that. I mean, there was hardly any focus on that, and learning about learning about the atrocities that were committed. Because I mean, we're talking about human trafficking, we're talking about torture, and we're talking about the transatlantic slave trade, and also during the years of enslavement and before the civil rights movement really gained ground. Um, I really, really I really identified with the anger and the frustration of having to fight back against all of these things that were happening, and the fact that people just gave praise to God. Right? It's like, okay, well, it was through God that we went through all the suffering, but it was like, well, how could this God allow this in the first
I
place?
mean, is the suffering really over? Let's be real about that. Is the suffering really over? Right? Just because we saw a specific legislative action taken during the Civil Rights Act, it didn't
Right,
change the systems in place. Right? We saw after the Civil Rights Act higher rates of black incarceration, higher rates of black poverty, higher rates of you know uh, drugs and police enforcement in these communities. It didn't actually end. It was just like a nice little
right.
label that didn't really do much.
Exactly. Right. And we're seeing all of this at the same and on one hand we're seeing progress, but then also on the other hand,
Yeah.
we're seeing, we're seeing all of these things that we're still holding the Black community back. And the fact that the church is one of the primary institutions in this community, and not to say that it hasn't done any good. However, this notion that this peaceful idea of resistance and revolution, and this idea of suffering in the hopes of an afterlife, was really troublesome.
Okay.
And it just really I think what really did it for me as because religion and the church has always been that elephant in the room in Black communities. There is a history of critique of the church within Black communities,
Yes.
and we can see that through historians like Dr. Carter G. Woodson, scholars like Hubert Henry Harrison, and the work of Lorraine Hansberry and Zora Neale Hurston, folks from the Harlem Renaissance. They have had their issues and their criticisms of the church and Christians and religion. That does tend to be overshadowed when it comes to Black history. The fact that there were people who dissented from religious thought and religious indoctrination. And I also remember one of my mentors, one of my teachers, when I openly started to express my views about religion as an adult, she actually tried to talk me out of it. And
Interesting.
she wanted to know, like, why was it that I didn't believe in God at all? And also when you look at I mean, we can talk about the sexual scandals and the hypocrisy all day long, right?
Obviously, yeah.
But also, I mean, as they've come more to light in these religious institutions, and never mind the Catholic Church, but we see a lot of these pastors who within Black communities, like Eddie Long, for example, before he died. At the end of 2010, when the scandal broke that he was having these sexual relations with young men in his church. That's down here in Atlanta, in New Birth,
Hmm.
at New Birth. And there were people who were actually still making excuses for him, and we were like, wait a minute, wait a minute. This is part of the problem here. I mean, it's one thing for us to talk about, the scandals and the gossip, but we are not actually talking about the harm that it has done to people in the community. What is the harm, the actual harm of taking these leaders at their word and allowing them to be these pillars of what is considered morality, but yet they are actually causing real harm to real people.
Of course.
And that
What
has
I'm interested here, though, is that I'm not hearing a distinction between belief in God and institutionalized religion. Do you see these things as interconnected? Do you see that no matter, like, when you look back, for example, at during the civil rights era, there was a lot of dissatisfaction with Christianity in the Black community, but this
Mhm.
dissatisfaction didn't express itself through non-belief in God, but rather a rejection of Christianity and the adoption of Islam through Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X. Do you think that God here is an essential problem, or is it religion as a problem? Because you can be a deist without religion, or you can believe in God without that, or are they intrinsically tied?
I do think that, especially within the Judeo-Christian traditions, that the
Okay.
concept of God can be a problem. It is a problem. Because for the longest time, I would rail against like Christianity and religion, but the more you dissect the concept of God, especially this God that is supposed to be all powerful, all knowing, sees everything, controls everything, but yet as humans, we supposedly have free will, and the Word of God is so subject to interpretation that it can compel people to do good, but also commit some extreme evil.
Yeah.
Uh, this notion that this God is guiding all of this without any evidence, and the fact that those who can seize the power get to tell a tale. It does say a lot about where this where the belief or the concept of God, how it is interpreted, can really have an impact on people. And also when we look at the different creation stories, like the different gods throughout history, and also how each, let's say each religion, and we know religions borrowed from each other.
Of course, yeah. No,
believes.
no religion existed. It's just like species evolved. Religions also evolved. They're collections of stories and myths and
Correct.
people's tradition. Right? Christianity, as it's found in Eastern Europe, is very different than Western Europe, and very different than Italy, than in
Mhm.
Africa. There's different forms of it with different traditions.
Correct. And so the lack of perspective about that for many people, I think can be a huge issue, especially when it comes to people thinking that either their religion or their God is better.
Hmm.
And even when we look at, like, let's say, for example, going back to the civil rights, the era of Jim Crow and such, the Ku Klux Klan is technically a Christian. It's a Christian organization.
Yes, it is.
It's a Christian organization. They think they're doing what their God is telling them to do. So that and there's actually, they can justify it. They can justify their actions in the Bible.
I mean, Sam Harris has famously said that when you look at slavery and segregation, the argument is in favor of the religious. It's not. It's
Hmm.
in favor. If you're going to appeal to the Bible, you're on the losing side of that argument. If you're against slavery, if you're against
Right.
segregation, yeah,
Absolutely. And also how that has been interpreted, how that concept of God has been used to enslave, not just physically, but mentally, and also how it has been used to create laws that effectively disfranchise groups of people.
yeah.
Um, Certainly, yes, we can look at the institutions. We can look at you know, uh, we can look at the religion itself, but it ultimately boils down to this idea that this God is compelling you to do this. And so, yes, as an atheist, I don't just have a problem with the institution of religion itself. I do also have issues with the concepts of God, especially those who believe in that anthropomorphic, human-like form of God, who is looking at us and judging our every move, peeking into our bedrooms and doing all these
A
things.
type of all-powerful Santa who's just there consistently.
Right. Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
So
Mhm.
I want to move this a little forward. So we're talking about God, but we know that people usually have justifications for the belief in God, and religions and religious household are very good at convincing us of illegitimate ways of believing in God. And these illegitimate ways seem to trickle into other areas as well of our society. So growing up in Valley Stream, I had a lot of black friends, a lot of interaction with the black community. And one thing that I found kind of universal, and you can tell me if this is true, is a strong belief in superstition, magic, and voodoo.
Uh-huh.
And is that something that you find more unique in religious or black communities as opposed to white communities? And what are the challenges of addressing that along with the God belief?
Oh boy. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We got good questions. We have time.
yes. So having been raised in, like, the Black conscious community, as I explained it before, you see a lot of the wooisms. You see a lot of the spirituality. So you have the rejection of the traditional Christian beliefs in favor of, some people converted to Islam. Some people may practice, or they may follow some like traditional African religions, or what their interpretations of them are.
Hmm.
Voodoo or voodoo, which was common on the western coast of Africa, and was made common in Haiti, which was of course demonized through the movie The Serpent and the Rainbow. It was that was an interesting propaganda movie
Of
for
course.
voodoo, which it's entertaining, but what we do find is that yes, there are a lot more Black folks who do cling to this sense of spirituality, and there's a lot of call to, like, like speaking to the ancestors and such, which isn't necessarily unplausible, to a certain extent, because we look to all of our ancestors through our different cultures
Yeah,
and see, certainly, in the Jewish community, you look to your ancestors who
of course.
who suffered, especially during the Holocaust.
My
Uh,
grandparents.
yeah, absolutely, and that's something that we should always keep in mind, and pay homage to. Um, but there is a sense of romanticism when it comes to, like, I think that now there is a rise in, like, what is considered witchcraft. Not even Wiccan, because Wiccan isn't necessarily considered witchcraft. It's more pagan than anything
Yeah,
else. But in some black circles, there are people who truly think that they are practicing witchcraft and casting spells on people, and I find that to be very, very interesting. There does seem to be a sense of, this idea of that we are just so inherently, you know predisposed to being religious, because of our history and culture, and it's like that isn't necessarily true.
hmm,
Black folks can reject and dispel religion and the concept of God just like anybody else.
of course.
It does not have to be that, that we have to accept it. But one of the reasons for that is because of the very heavy influence that the church has in black communities, because they were support, for, during those perilous times. So, there is a tendency for many black folks to stay attached to, and the research numbers, the research backs that up. That even though the number of religious nuns are rising, especially here in the United States, when you look at black communities, numbers are still pretty high at like
Yeah,
79%. So, yeah, there are a lot of people who still hold religion in very, very high regard, even though, the fundamentalism is dying, if you will.
okay.
There are a lot of more progressive Christians, a lot more religiously progressive folks out there who are taking into consideration the evidence and what's going on in public policy.
Yeah,
But there are still a lot of folks who are still holding on to it, and it does tend to lend itself to a lot of cultural practices here in the United States in an attempt to identify with being Afrocentric, connections to, the history and culture and the continent of Africa, especially because if you remember anything about the transatlantic slave trade, a lot of that was lost.
yes.
A lot of the enslaved they had their names changed. They could not practice their cultural traditions. They were often mixed with people from different cultures so that they could not always communicate. So there is still that part that many black folks feel like they're missing.
They're yearning for that tradition, that sense of home. In the
Correct.
In the Jewish home, I have so much of it. I can trace back my lineage 300, 400 years, even though my family suffered the Holocaust and we lost so many people in there.
Hmm.
So what is it that black non-believers, like, what can you offer in the sense of tradition to replace those sentiments or that yearning that the black community, as you say, like misses out? Because once you reject Christianity and you reject this false colonial notion of like your heritage, and you recognize, okay, well, really, when I think back, as it's the black church has been romanticized throughout films in like the 80s and 90s or whatever it is, and we kind of grew and we recognize the issues with that. And now, as that's dying off and that's being replaced with, like you said, witchcraft or no, or history from Western Africa, what do you? So, what do you give them to replace that? And at the same time, how do you, in an argument or in a type of deconversion proselytation, how do you get them to move away from that? What are some of the techniques that you've seen that works? Right, like what do you offer them, and how do you pull away the extra nonsense, the goo that exists there?
So the first thing is that, I am a realist, and I understand. Like, I will just say personally that the mission of Black non-believers is not to convert people to atheism
Okay.
or to try to get people to just simply leave religion.
Okay.
Um, The purpose of our organization is to uh, first to try to help to get more people that to admit that they don't believe, because there are a lot of Black folks who are still in that closet, if you will,
Okay.
because they're surrounded by so many, um, religious people. It's hard to have a substantive conversation with many Black folks about atheism and about the institution of the church, and actually leaving the concept of God behind. What we try to do as an organization first is offer, we don't try to replace it with anything, because religion does not have the monopoly on fellowship and community. that
Exactly.
is a that is a falsehood that needs to be dispelled, that religion holds a monopoly on community. It is what we do try to do is to help people rethink and reimagine what community is and what that
Okay.
looks like without a church, or without, because many people do many different, like Black folks, we do some of everything, right? And I'm a product of the Black community, like a huge product. I remember doing so many things, like as far as like other cultural celebrations and stuff without church. And so getting people to understand that they don't necessarily need religion in order to feel like they have a community. It's really because once the process of deconverting from religion is painful. It can be painful for a lot of people, right? And because you've been indoctrinated to think that you are nothing without this God or this belief, it's really about helping people find themselves first and foremost.
Yes.
Because if
Okay.
you are not comfortable with yourself, what will happen is you'll jump from, and we've seen people do this. They've jumped from denomination to denomination, from religion to religion, until they eventually found themselves out. And the
Okay.
most important thing that they miss is a sense of community, and that's understandable. And what we like to focus on at BN is letting people know that, for one, they're not alone, that they have had these that if they've had these doubts, or if they feel isolated because they're the only atheists, or moreover the only Black atheists, that they are not alone, that there are more of us out here. Also, what we do is also, we do host a lot of, like, we host a lot of social events.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we were very deliberate about, and because in the secular community, there's a lot of focus on, like, our intellectual capabilities, how many books we read, and how many people we can quote and cite, which is absolutely important. But when it comes to actual engagement with people, my background is hospitality and customer service, right? So it does not have to be that we're always so intellectually heavy. We can just talk to each other as human beings,
Hmm.
and relate and connect, because a lot of our members do have challenges when it comes to dating. So we also serve as like a network for people, if they're
Okay.
looking for those connections, if they're looking for romantic or whatever, friendships and such. We like to be that connection for them.
It's almost like a hub that help. Okay, so you offer that safe community for those who don't necessarily fit in within the status
Hmm.
quo of where they are. It,
Absolutely.
what is the difference that you're living in Atlanta now, right?
Yes.
And you have three children and your husband.
Hmm.
What is a challenge that you face? Because I know the South is much more religious than here in the
Hmm.
North. Is there a unique challenge that you have felt that with raising your kids in this environment, or not really?
I think the main challenge was definitely finding a network that wasn't like extremely religious, right?
Hmm.
We're in the Metro Atlanta area, but we definitely did not want to, I mean, and it's common to be asked what church you go to.
Okay.
That was a very common question when we first moved down here. And so it kind of made it was a little awkward when I would say, don't necessarily go to church, right? So
You don't go to church? What do you mean you don't go to church?
and we're not far from Creflo Dollar's church,
Okay.
World Changers Ministries. We're not far from him at all. So, and that is a huge complex over there in College Park on the south side of town. And so, for us, we've always tried to, and we've always exposed our kids to a number of things. We've always, like, let's say we do celebrate, we do Halloween celebrations.
Yeah,
We
you're
have
living the
really.
life. You're celebrating American holiday. Yeah, of course.
Yes, but the one thing that we were very, very careful and very cautious about was just sending our kids over to people who are extremely heavily religious, and they were almost damn near beating church and God into their kids, and it's like, yeah, no, 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 that's not going to work for us.
I see.
So that it was definitely a challenge, because there are still a lot of initiatives and a lot of things that are based around these churches and these activities, and so we just had to be very, very careful. uh,
I bring up the kids aspect because I noticed that for parents it's much harder to find non-religious or secular focused institutions for childcare or child after like for example when I was a kid here growing up in New York and I played football, people say, "Oh, we'll do a prayer before the game," and I'm like, "Well, or
ugh,
like, or you're part of the basketball team, or you go and you whatever community you're in for kids,
yeah.
that that absolutely comes in. Does Black non-believers have that, or is that something that you're working on, or is that something that you find needs to be like a place for not only adults to find community, but for children to find community as well in their development?
So we most actually a lot of our members don't have children, but
Okay.
what we do like to connect with, I mean, trying to start like a school or something, or if that like we do try to connect our children as much as possible. Um, the thing is, like, my children, just like I was a product of public schools.
Hmm.
And you actually find that a lot of that stuff here actually doesn't happen
Okay.
in public schools, which, fingers crossed, is a good thing. Um, and we'll continue to monitor that. I mean, we would absolutely love to be able to have like a sort of institution where we could have like this. Like you said, we don't have like a building per se.
Yeah.
We're very fluid, right?
Hmm.
Which, in a way, at times, I think is not necessarily a bad thing, because I think once you have a building, it has a tendency to kind of, I won't say get stuck, but I think that a building, or at least a facility of some kind, could help, with some sort of we love a library. Like we always, like, we have a bunch of books in our home, and so
Okay.
I have a lot of like non-religious and books that probably many in our community do have, but
Being
you know
able to come and take books is a fantastic thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah, and to have those resources for people. We definitely, we strongly champion separation of state and church. That's a big thing for us, so we do partner with other organizations, secular organizations as well, to let people know about, I mean, to definitely champion and fight, state church separation violations, and to inform our members. We always encourage each other to participate in the civil process, voting, getting involved. If you are able to get involved with politics, then that's good as well. That's the community building piece is so vast, and it's so diverse. There's a number of ways that people can get involved. But the main thing that we definitely try to focus on is that support, and
Okay.
that safe space, aspect of things. Maybe definitely, like, later or further down the line, we can. I mean, we are definitely contributing to history, and building institutional factors, as far as, like, becoming a part of the Black community, and being those that people understand that we are the non-religious,
Aspect,
organization.
the non-religious part of the
Yes,
Black community.
yes.
Just like an armchair sociologist, I want to pick your brain on this topic. With
Sure.
we overall in the United States, religiosity has dropped, and that is like.
Hmm.
But what's interesting is that while religiosity from like a Christian perspective or a Muslim perspective has dropped, it's the same type of thinking patterns that when we see that same fundamentalist religious community kind of start using that same fallacious reasoning and attribute that towards political notions, whether they talk about Trump or belief in other leaders.
Hmm.
What is so one? What are your thoughts on that? And two, is there a parallel in the Black community that people might not be aware of? Where
So I think that as human beings, we do have a tendency to appeal to our, we have a tendency to appeal to what might be emotionally either comforting or triggering, to us. I don't think that isn't inherent to religious people or to religion or belief in God at all. I think that
correct?
that is a part of the human condition. And I think that as non-religious people, it's we have a responsibility to be more mindful of when we're doing that. I think, like you said before, it doesn't just that type of thinking and that indoctrination doesn't just stay within like religious institutions, right? If you are taught to simply take something at its word without questioning it, and if you do question it, you're either going to be ostracized or something bad's going to happen to you. That spills over into other areas of our lives, and that does, we do see that when it comes to politics, where when we see people that are very probably unaware and uneducated about certain policies or even about their politicians or who they're voting for, about their
Hmm.
party. Um, that just goes to show, the 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 unfortunate aspect of people who are just doing things because they've been doing them for a long time, out of that sense of tradition, if you will.
Okay.
And so we always, it's important for us as people to, because I think almost anything can become religious like. We see that in a number of, I mean, it's football season now, right? People are religious about football.
Correct, they are religious, but that's like a
That's
type of
fun thing,
religion that's
right?
fun. It's okay. No
Yeah,
one really
it
takes it that. Maybe like five people in the world take it that seriously, but
is. But
there
yeah,
it's benign. There it's benign, but
right.
that benign can metastasize into other areas like politics, personal
Absolutely.
relationships, etc.,
Yes,
etc.
it does. And when people are conditioned to just doing things either out of societal expectations or expectations out of, their religious beliefs or what they've been, indoctrinated to do, because that does carry over, right? We know that religions like the big three, like the Judeo-Christian, like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, they're not necessarily kind towards women.
No,
So
they're not.
yeah, and so that does spill over into the public policies and politics, where we see these laws being passed that are unfavorable to women and children. We just saw the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which has a huge impact on reproductive rights, not just for women, but for men and LGBTQ plus folks as well. So it doesn't just impact women, but when they're based in, these ideals that come from religion, it does absolutely spill over. And we still see a number of politicians, particularly within the Black community, espouse their faith in God and such. And it's just like, oh my gosh, like, even when, when we talk about like the Trump administration and how he had all these Black pastors praying over him. I'm just like,
Yeah,
it
yeah. That was
was a
that was that, that
circus.
was that was that was. I could not believe the same man that David Duke was like, "This is my guy," being prayed over by Black pastors. I could understand that. Last week, I had an interview with Cornel West, who's
Hmm.
running for president, who's a very religious man,
Yes, he
who's a
is.
very, but he's progressive and he's
Yeah.
for all these other things. And I asked him a similar question, like, how do you contend with your religiosity when Christianity was a tool for oppression? And his way of going about it was simply saying, I'm very critical of the church when I need to be critical of the church. I'm very critical of myself when I need to be critical of myself. But he still holds this belief that the church is the path to black salvation. What would be your response to him? Or
I
what
would
if you
I would disagree with him wholeheartedly. I think that if you are an educated individual and you understand that there is a critical problem with the church, there is a critical problem with the belief itself, then you have to, and for so many black folks it's very uncomfortable, right? It's that cognitive dissonance where that this is a problem, but out of tradition and moreover out of fear. um, Dr. West clearly has an emotional tie to his belief.
Mhm.
I think he is holding on to the glory and the history of the church, even though historically, even during the civil rights movement, you couldn't really count on every religious leader, and you certainly couldn't count on every religious, every church to be involved with the civil rights movement, because it was dangerous, right? But it also overlooks the history of the humanists and the freethinkers and the atheists who were involved with the civil rights movement at the time, and even now. There
Can you elaborate on that actually? Because I don't know much about that. If you can elaborate a bit
Absolutely.
on that.
So you had A. Philip Randolph, or Asa Philip Randolph,
Okay,
who
let me write that down.
was the founder of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, who was the key organizer for the March on Washington. I mean, he understood working with religious people as a tool for like civil rights.
Hmm.
You also have Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, who was one of the co-founders of the NAACP, who was extremely critical of the Black church. You also had, like I said before, Hubert Henry Harrison, who
Yeah.
was a scholar and orator during the Harlem Renaissance. Stokely Carmichael, who was, I think he was with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, um, during the like right after the Civil Rights Movement. So there's a really good book by Professor Chris Cameron called Black Freethinkers: A History of
Okay.
African American Secularism, and he goes into the history of like James Foreman, and I think he was with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Who was I think he was from Mississippi, and he was an atheist. So there were a number of folks within the Black community and historically, who were against, or who did not fully subscribe to religious belief, or if they did not subscribe at all. And again, that aspect of their history was almost but wiped out. And again, you have folks who were very, very critical within the civil rights movement, who were humanists, who were pretty non-religious. And that, I think that Dr. West, um, could, even with his level of education, because no one can know everything, right?
Obviously.
But uh, however, you would think that with his level of scholarship, that he would know that there were Black folks in the community, highly educated Black folks in the community, who did let that go. I'm not sure exactly what that does for him. I am very well aware of Dr. West. I don't know him personally. I do think that there are a lot of Black theologians who hold on to it because of the fact that there is so much history rooted in Black theology, especially Black liberation theology, and how they may
Okay.
have used it to they've taken aspects of the religion and the belief to compel them to fight for Black liberation, and I can respect that. However, it does not change the doctrine of the Bible. It does not change the history of how it has enslaved our ancestors and how it is responsible for institutional racism and injustice. And I personally cannot make, we can't make Dr. West, like
Yeah,
see
yeah.
it that way, right? But however, I would disagree. I strongly disagree with him that the church is simply the path to salvation for the Black community, especially when it has been at the root of our oppression.
It's not only the roots; it took over completely the everything. You guys were African Americans and blacks were forced to destroy their religions and adopt this one, or they would be killed or tortured or whatever it might be.
Absolutely. Hmm.
So real quick, because we have like 4 minutes left for the show, but I wanted to ask you something, and this is like a fun question I like to ask.
Sure.
What is one of your favorite either arguments or aha moments that you've experienced when you've spoken to a religious person and you see that moment where it clicks? Like, what is one thing that either clicked for you or you've seen click for other people that you find like genuinely fun or interesting to talk about?
So what I find is that when I talk to a religious person and I say that I'm an atheist, and they're like, "You don't believe in God?" And I'm like, "Well, which one?
Okay.
Which one?" So you have to ask they are forced to think about, well, there are plenty of gods out there. You clearly think that your God is, the one true God. But there are other gods and beliefs out there that think that theirs are the one true. And what makes it true? What besides simply having faith in it? So uh, and when people, they have that look of, because when you hear atheists, people still think of devil worship. I'm like, well,
Yes.
if I don't believe in a God, I don't believe in a devil. I don't. So
That paradigm break is probably it's like a little magic trick almost. You see like a right, it's like doing a card trick to someone for the first time.
right. And I also do get a kick out of, well, when I tell people I don't believe in God after I've done something nice for them, they're like, wait, you don't believe? But it's like, it's almost like a shock that we
A
can
nice
be
person could be a
organized.
non-believer. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm just like, well, you don't have to believe in a God in order to be a good person.
Hmm.
In fact, I think it makes you a better person. It can make you a better person.
Yeah, that's
If
the
you,
classic line. If you do nice things and you're afraid of going to hell, you're not doing it because you're nice. You're doing it because you're afraid of going to hell.
correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you? What are you doing? What's your current project? Plug yourself in. I know it was a pleasure of having you on, Mandisa. It was phenomenal.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, my apologies for being
Do
tardy.
not worry about that. That's okay. That happens.
So you can find us everywhere on the web. First and foremost at blacknonbelievers.org. That's our website. You can find us on Facebook at Black Nonbelievers. We are on Instagram at Be Nonbelievers Inc. We are on X at Be
X.
Nonbelievers. The B and the N are capitalized. We currently host a YouTube show on our YouTube channel.
Okay.
It's called In the Cut. It airs every first and third Saturday of each month, and every show we do an interview with someone who is very active within the secular community, and primarily from the Black non-religious community that people aren't aware of. We are currently in the process of just reorganizing our organization. We're looking for new board members. We're looking for new affiliate leaders. And of course, we're always looking for new supporters. We are a 501c3 organization. We are getting ready for our annual cruise convention, BNC Con, as
Hmm.
you can see in the back. We do that every year. And we also just we continue to we continue to host events in person. We are headquartered in the Atlanta, Georgia area, but our primary focus right now is definitely doing some rebuilding and reorganizing at the organization, and we also co-sponsor a student scholarship with the Secular Student Alliance. We
That's
will be
amazing.
announcing we will be announcing our the winner of the Hurston Scholarship, which was named after Zora Theodore Neil Hurston, who was also
Hmm.
a free thinker. We will be announcing the winner of the Hurston Scholarship soon. We've been doing that annually. Very, very proud of that. And so
Should be
yeah, we
amazing.
definitely do a lot. We
It's
are
amazing.
yes. So yeah, definitely find us on
Yeah,
everywhere.
I'll make sure to link everything in the description below. I'll edit it after the thing when we upload it. And again, thank you so much, Mandisa, for coming on, not having me on. And yeah, maybe we'll do this another time. We'll get you to talk with. Maybe we'll get you on stage or someone. We'll have a
Oh
good time about
sure.
it.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
of course. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and we'll see you around.
All right.
That was amazing. What a fantastic guest actually to have on the show. Really, really good. Really, really good thing. I have some homework, some people that I didn't know about that I should definitely need to research and read about. Again, this is Wednesday. It's not my full show, so I'm gonna take the night off in many respects. She was a fantastic guest, and yes, Sour Castle. God bless. Great show. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And as always, everyone, stay thinking. Where's my outro screen? There is my outro screen.